Gracious Father, as a community, as a family, even though we may not know what people may be suffering with, I pray that you just give us a tender heart and an insightful heart to help us to minister one another, that your Spirit would work through us, and we might be that shoulder for people or that arm around them that they might need this morning, or just a word of encouragement. I pray for your blessing upon little body, your church. Bring healing and bring growth. And our prayer this morning is for you would just change our hearts. So that's your Spirit's work. Continue to work in our lives to make us more like your Son. So teach us today as we just sit at your feet and ask to learn. In Jesus' name. John and Mary were sitting across from us in a marriage counseling session. The tension between them was very obvious. Mary was about ready to throw the towel in on 7 years of marriage. She was very frustrated with John's emotional unavailability and just his detached coldness. In anger, she lashes out at him, "You will never change." I attempt to bring some calm in the room by explaining to John that, John, anger is really an attempt at intimacy. It's an unsuccessful attempt, but Mary is showing you a window into her heart. She really wants emotional intimacy with you. She's inviting you into a deeper relationship. John, triggered by Mary's emotional outburst of anger, didn't hear a thing I said. Instead, he tried to defend himself. "That's just the way I am." John, you big dope. Not a good response. Our emotions inform our behavior. Our behaviors, let me do that again. Our beliefs inform our emotions. Our emotions put us in motion and produce a behavior. Mary's lashing out, that's her behavior, flowed from her emotions, frustration, and that emotion came from her belief John would never change. And John's response in that counseling session only solidified that belief in Mary's mind. Yes, Mary snapped at him as she parroted back his words to him. "That's just the way I am." "You're right, John. You will never change." The most toxic belief in relationships is the belief that your partner will never change. I don't recall where I first read that or where I learned it, but I think that statement is an important insight. The most toxic belief in relationships is the belief that your partner will never change. When things aren't going well in a relationship, there's always that tendency to sort of extrapolate that out and assume the future holds more the same. So Mary is experiencing hopelessness because she believes, well, tomorrow is going to be exactly like today. John will never change. Toxic belief. But equally as toxic and tragic in this situation is John's belief. John's belief was, that's just the way I am. It runs in my family. A zebra can't change his stripes. A leopard can't change his spots. It's too late to change. Just the way I am. I just read, every year, about 45% of people in this society seize upon the desire for a fresh start at New Year's, and they will make one or two or more resolutions to make a lifestyle change. And you know this. Every year, 97% of us with firm resolutions that we're going to make a change. Well, those resolutions don't pan out, and we are left unchanged. That just reinforces this lie that we can't change. Maybe that's why the 55% of the other people don't even make resolutions, because they believe, this is just the way I am, why bother? I'm not going to change. And here's the question that forms the basis of this teaching series. Who told you that? Really, who told you that you couldn't change? We're talking about the lies that we believe, and the lie is, I'm never going to change. Who told you that? We have an enemy, the father of lies, the great deceiver, and every day the enemy gives us a script to read, and that script is full of lies about us, about who God is. Our enemy knows when we believe a lie, it has the power of truth in our life, and then it's displayed. It's lived out. We live out that lie. One of the ways the Bible talks about lies that the enemy tells us is it uses a word, stronghold. We could define stronghold as lies of the enemy that we live by. That's a stronghold. 2 Corinthians chapter 10. Paul talks about these strongholds, these areas we have trouble changing because we believe a lie, and we've believed it for so long. For though we live in the world, we do not wage war as the world does. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. Great word picture in Paul's era. Everyone understood. Every large city of that time had a stronghold, an area of the city that was surrounded by walls. Sometimes those walls had been reinforced multiple times over the years. They could be up to 20 feet wide. And so this stronghold was an area, this secure area surrounded by walls. Paul's using that word stronghold, that word picture to say there's an area in your life that's the enemy has set walls around. He has told you these lies, and now this is his area. He has a certain jurisdiction in your life because you have believed those lies. And his goal is to increasingly take more territory from you. So in this series, we've been talking about the lies of the enemy. We first talked about the lies of pride and self-sufficiency. I got this. I can do it on my own. I'm in control. However it's expressed, it's a lie of pride. And if Satan can get us to buy into that, this I got this lie, well, God becomes unnecessary, at least in that area of our life. Last week we talked about the lies of insecurity and inferiority and inadequacy. You don't have what it takes. You don't know what you're doing. It's not good enough. And those destructive lies form our self-definition. Remember that? Self-definition, what we believe about ourselves, out of our beliefs flow our emotions, flow our behavior. If you're going to believe that you're inadequate and inferior, well, that's going to be reflected in your life. This morning, we're talking about another one of Satan's favorite lies. You can never change. That's just who you are. The present is indicative of the future. You will always struggle with this habit. You will never be able to quit that behavior. You will never change. On the mental health field, those sort of lies are referred to as toxic core beliefs. Toxic core beliefs, sometimes they're called limiting beliefs, but core beliefs determine how we perceive ourselves and the world at large. Our core beliefs are the unconscious stories, the unconscious sort of convictions and judgments in our mind. Sometimes there might be this degrading message or lie from earlier in your life, and you stored that away in your subconscious mind. And that message governs everything you do. If that message is, you will never change, then Satan has a stronghold that he will use against us. Paul continues, verse 5. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. Paul actually gives us a definition of stronghold right there. Strongholds are arguments and every pretension or every way of thinking that sets itself up against the knowledge, against the truth of God. Strongholds are lies that contradict the truth of God. And how are they demolished? By taking every thought captive, making it obedient to Christ. And the idea of the word picture here, very graphic. It literally means to arrest that lie. You arrest that thought and you wrestle it to the ground and you handcuff it and you force it into submission to God's truth. You take that thought obedient to Christ. That is how strongholds are destroyed. Because when we change our beliefs, we start doing things differently than we've done before. Firm psychological basis to affirm that. Two very basic sort of laws. The first one is called the law of cognition. We've actually talked about this continually, but the dominant movement in psychology is cognitive behavioral psychology. It simply says that you are what you think about. So amazing, isn't it? The Bible said that long before Alfred Adler or any other psychologist said that, back in the book of Proverbs. Be careful how you think. Your life is shaped by your thoughts. Does it get clearer than that? Be careful how you think, because your life is shaped by your thoughts. Your beliefs inform your emotions put you in motion, create a behavior. Your beliefs create your behavior. Life is shaped by our thoughts. The script you are reading is what determines your behavior. That's why we must demolish Satan's stronghold of lies. The law of cognition, the other one is the law of exposure. And this law basically says your mind absorbs and then reflects whatever you're exposed to the most. That's why Paul would say, fix your thoughts on what's true and honorable, right and pure and lovely and admirable. Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise. The law of exposure says your mind absorbs and then reflects what you are exposed to the most. And the law of cognition says what you think about most determines your story, determines your life. And Paul understood that. He understood both of those laws well. He talks about in Romans 8, actually an illustration of those two laws. What we think about determines whether the war is won or lost, because the battle is in the mind. So, letting your sinful nature is the ingrained patterns of thought and behavior from your unregenerate days. So letting your sinful nature control your mind leads to death. But letting the Spirit of God control your mind leads to life and peace. That's just the law of exposure and the law of cognition put together in one verse. Paul says, if you think about these things, when you give your mind to such things, here's where it's going to lead. It's going to determine the course of your life. And another sort of basic foundational verse we add to that, just jump a couple chapters forward in the book of Romans, and we come to chapter 12. And we read, you know this verse, do not conform to the pattern of this world. Don't just go along with the thinking of the secular world. Don't let it press you into its mold, its way of thinking, but be transformed. You know this? Our word metamorphosis comes from that Greek word. Don't be changed, but be changed, transformed, by the renewing of your mind. Again, what you think about determines whether you're going to be conformed or transformed. Now, you know what? You've heard this, and at this point, I could very easily just go into that standard sort of little preach about, you guys, you need to be in the Word, and, you should think about memorizing some verses and meditating on Scripture, and then as a preacher, then I could shame you a little bit, because Shame on you for not doing more of that. But let's go a little deeper this morning. Because, I'm sort of wrestling with this. If it was that easy, then why is it so difficult for people to change? Really. Going back to the opening scenario, John was a Christian. John was actually very faithful in attending church, and he read his Bible. Why did he believe he couldn't change? That's just the way I am. I'm going to kind of stumble through an attempt to an answer here. I want us to really think about this, and I've just begun to start to do some research on this, but we have a conscious mind, and then there is the subconscious mind. Conscious mind, that's the prefrontal cortex. That's where, logic and sort of the creative thought processing part of your brain, that's what you're using your conscious mind when you're at work, hopefully, your conscious mind. Okay, and then the subconscious mind. Sometimes the subconscious mind is referred to as the habit brain. About 95% of our day, in terms of day-to-day activity, all comes from the subconscious mind, that habitual mind. That's why we can drive through traffic and eat lunch and maybe even respond to a text. And it's all done by habit. And throughout that time, you're driving, you're eating lunch, you're not thinking about any of that. Your conscious mind is still absorbed with a problem at work or a problem at home. That's what your conscious mind is thinking about. Not thinking about driving. Okay. But here, it's important to know that emotional, sort of traumatic wounds in your life, those sort of lies maybe wounds early in your life that stored lies in your mind, where were they stored? Subconscious mind. If this is making sense to you, in the subconscious mind. John, in our scenario, was raised by this emotionally distant and sort of physically absent father, and when his father was present, he shamed him with statements like, "You'll never amount to anything, that's just who you are, quit being a big crybaby." And those experiences implanted these lies in his mind that then became strongholds in his life that were carried over into that relationship in his marriage. Okay? Now here's the question, if you kind of followed that. What part of your mind are you engaging when the preacher tells you you're supposed to read the Bible more? You should memorize a verse, okay? That would help you. What part of your mind are you engaging when you do that? You're engaging the conscious mind. But the lie is deep in the subconscious mind. And when we approach Bible study or memorization as just some sort of discipline of the religious life, something I need to put in my daily routine, it's a ritual that needs to be followed. Well, the truth doesn't get into the subconscious mind very easily. That truth doesn't get into the subconscious mind and record over those tapes that were programmed into the subconscious mind. It's just not very easy. And I think, as I'm thinking about this, and again the question is, why is change not easier? I think it's because we fail really to be aware and then fail to approach the Christian life as this intimate spiritual relationship where our soul, the essential part of who we are, that was spiritually dead at one moment in life and then made spiritually alive because of God's regenerating work, that miraculous regenerating work of God when we became spiritually alive, when we became His children. And we say those things and we don't think about how mysterious and how marvelous that is. Okay? And so the soul now communes with the Spirit of God that dwells in us. That's another one of those things that happens at that moment of regeneration. This life, this Christian life, is meant to be this relational, intimate experience with God. And we go, oh yeah, we've heard that. It's this little trite phrase, Christianity, it's not a religion, it's a relationship. But just fight through that. The truth is, there is this experiential, relational intimacy in this life with Jesus, who's now our Savior. And when we approach the Christian life like that, and then we go to the Word, His Word, and the thought is, oh, I love those songs where we sing songs about, oh, my soul, bless the Lord, oh, my soul. You're speaking to that deepest core of who you are, oh, my soul, and the Spirit of God that now resides in me. Speak to me and take these truths and change my life. With that sort of experiential moment, the truth then goes deeper into the subconscious mind. We even begin to pray that way and open ourselves up to say, I know there are lies from the woundedness of my past, lies that now shape my life. God, you're the Spirit of truth. Open your Word. Bring healing into my life. Replace those lies. And it's the experience of being in communion with God that way that the truths now go deeper. I don't know. That's just where I'm settling and processing that. But I know it's why my soul resonates when I get books about the reflective life, or the contemplative life, or meditation, the real deep sort of communing with God. It's not about religious ritual. It's about that relationship. And God the Father longs for that with us. That's the exciting part about it. He is longing for that. A couple things to think about. We'll wrap this up. When we become aware that there's this lie in our mind, you'll never change. That's just the way you are. You'll never break this habit. Here's some things we need to remind ourselves of. This is the truth from the Word. And the number one, I mentioned this, the first thing you say is, if I'm a Christian, I am a Christian. A radical change has already occurred. A radical change has already occurred because I was spiritually dead and now I'm spiritually alive. That's not something I did. That was the regenerative power of the Spirit of God in my life. I was born again. I'm now a child of God. The Spirit, the Holy Spirit now dwells in me. Talk about change, radical change. Second thing we think about, that's the moment of salvation. The second thing we think about is progress. Not perfection, but progress. Remember that word transformed in Romans 12. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Verb tense, ongoing, continuous activity. We are in process of growth. Every time we blow it and the lie reemerges in our mind, you'll never change, that's just who you are. We say, no, this is the sanctification process. Sanctification is talking about the ongoing process of becoming more and more like Christ in our character, and that is a lifelong process. The fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. It is the fruit of the Spirit in our lives. And I remind people that little green apple on the tree in the springtime, it's just as much of an apple as that beautiful red delicious apple in the fall. It's an apple. The only difference is maturity. And we are in process. We will always be in process Philippians 1. And I am certain that God who began the good work within you, that's the moment of salvation. He began that good work, that work of regeneration. We are saved, made spiritually alive. I am certain that God who began the good work within you will continue his work. Now we're talking about sanctification, that ongoing process of becoming more and more like Christ in this life down here, until it is finally finished on the day when Christ Jesus returns, because on that day it's now called glorification. Salvation, sanctification, glorification. When we finally become like Christ, we're in process. It's an ongoing work until it is finally finished on the day when Christ returns for us. Wonderful illustration of that. Ruth Graham Bell, a wife of Billy Graham, she wanted this written on her tombstone. On her tombstone it reads, "End of construction. Thank you for your patience." Isn't good? And that's true. The sanctification process will not end until that moment we are with Jesus. We are still a work in progress. Please have patience. So we think a radical change has already occurred. We are in a process, and finally we think this is God's power, not my power, that brings change. You're not going to self-help your way out of destroying those really deep-seated strongholds in your mind. The weapons we fight with, 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 5, were divine, had divine power. Remember that. The weapons we fight with have divine power. And as we begin to take that thought captive and we wrestle it to the ground and we handcuff it and we bring it to under the authority of Christ, as we do that, the Spirit begins to do his transforming work in our lives. And when we replace the lie with the truth will set us free. Good stuff. Anybody got questions? John and Mary here today? We're all John and Mary. Can I pray with you? Worship team, come on back up. Father, be gracious with us, a stubborn, recalcitrant people that we are. Stiff-necked people. Make our hearts soft and willing for your Spirit's conforming work in our life. But right now, we just simply pray that if that lie is being held by anyone here, that it'll be gone. It'll be replaced by the truth, and we will just rejoice in the truth that you are at work in our lives. And in your perfect timing, you will conform us more and more to the image of Christ until that day that we are with you. And we are so grateful for that. In Jesus' name, amen. Let's stand for a closing song. This is that thought from Philippians chapter 1, put into song and be encouraged by these words.